Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second level of Rabbi Moshe Cordevero's Tomer Devorah, which I've translated as the Kabbalah of Forgiveness with a commentary. Um, the first level, just to do a very quick recap, in the first level, God, as it were, provides energy to human beings for whatever they do. All the energy that we require for our daily existence is constantly flowing into us like electricity into let's say, a computer or a toaster or something like that. And if the toaster were to start doing something strange, like let's say playing music, or more common, let's say burning the toast, and the timer isn't working right, then, on a human level, we just pull the plug and that's it for the toaster, and we get rid of it and buy a new one, that kind of thing. But God doesn't do that. God, as it were, forgives the toaster, keeps giving it energy until the toaster can figure out how to start toasting bread properly. Now, that's a really bizarre and maybe inappropriate analogy, because humans are not toasters. Humans hopefully have the capacity of change, have the capacity to reform their ways. So we hope that God continues to give us energy so we can work through those issues on our own. And so too, as we said in the first level, Rabbi Cordovero says that we should forgive others and allow them their transgressions, giving them the time to resolve their issues on their own. Now, the second level, which we're going to discuss today, in many ways just develops that idea a little further. And at this point, it gets a little more Kabbalistic and a little more spooky, in fact. So here's a basic element of Cordoveran Kabbalah. And actually, it goes very, very far back into the Jewish mystical tradition, and in fact, certain elements of it are present even in what's called Torah's Nigla, or the revealed Torah. When a person commits an act, either a positive act or a negative act, an energy is released into the universe. When the act is a positive act, a mitzvah, something that is good for the universe, fulfillment of God's will, then that releases a kind of a messenger known as a malach. In fact, young children in observant Jewish homes are often taught that when they say a blessing over the food that they're eating, things like that, they are actually creating malachim. They're creating angels, positive energy sources that go out, benefit the world, and so on. That's also known as a sneger in Aramaic, a defender. Something that after 120 years, when a person has to account for their deeds, then all these snegers, all these defenders come forward and say, he gave tzedakah, he gave charity in this moment, or he helped out a person in this way, or he smiled appropriately at a person who was down, cheered them up, that kind of thing. These are all snegers. Now, unfortunately, the converse is also true. If a person commits a hurtful act, a wrong deed, transgresses God's will, then this creates a kind of a negative energy source, which can be called a kategor, or a prosecutor, in the language of the Mishnah, or in the language of Cordoveran Kabbalah, it's called a mashchis, a destroyer. And this kind of energy being is rather different, in that whereas the malach, the positive being, wants to benefit the universe and fill the universe with God's light, as it were, the mashchis wants to detract from it, darken the world. And it kind of feeds on suffering. And that mashchis is actually connected to the person, just like the sneger, the defender, as it were, has an address saying that so-and-so created that person. The same is true of a kateger, of a prosecutor. That the kateger then, after 120 years, says, hey, this person spoke words of lashon hara, words of character assassination behind this person's back, and in fact it's true. There it is. The kateger is standing there, the negative energy source is there, and so on. So this is the second level of God's forgiveness, is that just like God continues to provide energy to human beings in their actions, if we also accept the premise, which is basic in Jewish thought, that no being can exist outside of the constant energy flow of God, it stands to reason then that even these negative energy beings, these mashchisim, these kategorim, these prosecutors, they also require a constant influx of energy to keep them alive. And if that energy doesn't come from God, then that energy must come from the one who made them. God is within his right, so to speak, to say to the kateger, you ugly being, I did not create you. Go back to the one who did create you and take your energy from that person. And in fact, that being can then go back to the human being who made him and say, all right, you created this amount of evil in the world, this amount of negative energy. This is a kind of an energy debt that you imposed on the world, and now I'm going to take it out of you. And that can come out, as the Tomer Devorah says, in one of three ways. Either through suffering, or painful physical suffering, or emotional suffering, what have you, or through death, because death atones for a lot, or through Gehinnom, which is sort of like purgatory. It's not exactly like hell, but it's kind of like something bad that happens after death. The latter two are definitely much worse than the first. The first option, that is suffering, is something that we can choose for ourselves. And we're not talking here about necessarily taking out whips and self-flagellation and rolling in the snow and things like that. It's the kind of suffering that comes through introspection, evaluation of one's deeds, regret, understanding how we've done wrong, and then working through the process. There's a lot of literature in the Jewish tradition on exactly how to do this. In fact, one great book, the Shari Tshuva, lists 20 different levels of regret that a person can go through. Oy vey's mir, right? But nevertheless, the idea of taking a hard look at yourself and saying, I really didn't treat that person right, that is the kind of energy that it can cancel out the energy debt that one created through this hurtful act. This is kind of the overall physics of transgression that is set up in the Cordoveran Kabbalistic system. Right? So let's just understand that properly. In the first level, God is constantly giving energy to human beings, and even when human beings use that energy incorrectly, God still continues that energy flow to go. Second level, what happens is that God, that when we behave inappropriately, we create these negative energy beings. These negative energy beings are also looking for sustenance. They're also looking for some kind of energy source. And God, within his rights, could say, hey, I didn't make you. Go to the one who made you. Take your energy from him. But nevertheless, God says, no, I'll take care of this. I'll keep paying down the debt and let the person who created that mashkas eventually come around to address that him or herself, and then reduce the energy debt by seriously repenting, going through their ways. Well, now bringing this down to a human level, I mean, this is all kind of weird and spooky, this idea of these energy beings that are surrounding us and have our names on them so everybody knows who created them. That's very weird stuff. But how do we actually implement it into a human level? So the Tomer Devorah is, as I've said in the early lectures, really a pragmatic human document. It is for our actual use in daily life. And in fact, we can apply this principle to our daily life as well. Specifically, what's really going on here is that God is, as it were, granting forbearance on a loan. As the Talmud says, for example, a person owes money to two people. One is his friend and one is his enemy. The friend says, you owe me a lot of money, you can pay me back a little at a time. The enemy says, no, I want it all right now. So as it were, God is like the friend who says, you can pay me, you owe me money, as it were. You committed this negative disease element in the universe, you harmed the spiritual environment, so now you've got to fix it. But I'll let you fix it a little at a time. You don't have to do it all at once. And that's a benefit to us. So too in our interpersonal relationships. When someone harms us, the Tomer Devorah says the main thing is to try and give them time to fix it themselves. Now, you don't have to be a dish rag. You don't have to be a doormat. But when you are wronged, give that other person a chance to rectify the situation. Myself, I'm just one of those people. When someone wrongs me, I like an apology. But I have to say, one of my own weaknesses, I like apologies to be just so. The apology has to be said right. If you don't apologize right, it's really hard on me. So what I have to work on myself is that I have to understand there are a lot of different ways that people apologize. Sometimes people apologize in exactly the right wording, please forgive me, identifying exactly what I did wrong and things like that. Other people apologize by, just going out and getting me a cup of coffee. And they don't really have it in themselves to say, I'm really sorry for doing that particular thing. That's kind of hard, but they want to show that they are sorry. And so they'll buy me the coffee, as it were. And, I should learn that it's upon me, the onus is on me to accept the coffee as the full apology. In other words, give them time to address it themselves. So on a pragmatic level, to implement the second level of Tomer Dvorah is to give people a chance to address their wrongs. They do something wrong to you, you can let them know, but don't demand that they change on the spot. Give them a chance to work through those issues on their own. Okay, that's about it. I hope you found this useful. Come back for the third level, which gets even weirder. Thank you.